Hello and welcome back to the Underhand Free Throw. My name is Simon. Normally I'd be joined by Ian, but unfortunately he is out of town this week. So it's just going to be me for this video. This week I wanted to look back on the first half of the NBA season. We are now officially over halfway through, and I wanted to look at some of the things that were the most surprising, at least to me and Ian, coming into this season. Things that we didn't necessarily expect to happen, and things have just played out differently than we thought they were going to. Before we get started, if you enjoy this kind of content and you want to see more NBA stuff from us, feel free to give it a like and subscribe, and we're going to keep making it. So now let's get into our 5 biggest surprises of this now no longer young, but officially halfway through NBA season. The first surprise, number 5 if you will, is LAURI Markkanen's play this year. LAURI Markkanen was traded to the Utah Jazz this season after spending the previous year of his career with the Cavaliers and the first 4 years of his career with the Chicago Bulls. While in Chicago, LAURI Markkanen was always a decent player with a lot of promise, but a flawed player, didn't necessarily always give you really what you wanted, especially defensively. And offensively, he had games where he'd kind of drift in and out of the offense and wasn't always a focal point. Was that LAURI's play or was that coaching? Who knows at the time, but this season it seemed like he can handle a much larger offensive load. LAURI Markkanen is basically at career highs across the board. He's playing the most minutes he's ever played in his career, and he's also scoring and rebounding the most that he's ever done before. Even last season with the Cavaliers, which was a little bit underrated. He definitely wasn't the focal point of the offense, but he was a very good player for the Cavaliers last year. An above average defender, which a lot of people didn't expect, and a pretty significant offensive piece for them as well. But this year with the Jazz, LAURI has just taken it to another level, and not only has his scoring load and responsibility increased, but all of his efficiencies are better too. He has the highest true shooting percentage of his career, and also he's shooting the best from 3 that he ever has. One thing that's really shocked me, LAURI is getting a lot of credit for his offensive improvements this year, but he's also a pretty solid defender. LAURI is actually a pretty significant positive defensively for the Utah Jazz when he's on the court. They're quite a bit worse without him on the court, and you wouldn't necessarily expect that for a 7-foot guy who's not the most mobile player in the world, especially because he's often defending perimeter players since he is effectively their 3 when he's on the floor. But he's been good. LAURI actually excels quite a bit at defending perimeter players when they're not too quick. He doesn't quite have the mobility to keep up with the really fast guys. But the benefit of playing 2 bigs all the time, like the Utah Jazz often do, is even when guys get by LAURI, they're not exactly getting uncontested shots at the rim either. So all in all, incredible season for LAURI Markkanen, and I really expect to see him in the All-Star game. And it will definitely be a well-deserved inclusion if he does in fact make it. The next surprise that I had this season is the Bucks' struggles on offense. So on the surface, some of this may make sense. If you hear the Bucks struggling on offense, you may think, well, Jrue Holiday has missed some games, Giannis himself has missed some games, and Khris Middleton has only played 7 games this year, and he wasn't very good even when he was on the court. So it should make sense that they were worse this year than they were last year on offense, right? But the drop-off has been really drastic, even for a team missing its second best player for essentially all of the season. Last year, the Milwaukee Bucks finished as the 3rd best offense in the NBA by offensive rating, and this year they dropped 20 spots, all the way down to 23rd. Right now, they're sitting just below the middling Washington Wizards in offensive rating. So why is this? Why is a team that has a superstar offensive player who really should be just a focal point for an offense and should make a team pretty good just by himself, regardless of the surrounding pieces, why have they struggled so much? And of course, the answer is more complicated than just one thing, but the main thing I can really point to as to why the Bucks are struggling so much is they're just a really bad shooting team. Khris Middleton being out definitely hurts with that, but every team that hopes to compete for a championship should have more than just one player who's capable of finishing open shots when they're generated for him. But the Bucks offense has not been able to do that. Thanks in most part to Giannis, the Bucks are actually top 2 in the NBA at generating what the NBA site calls open shots, which are essentially just shots that don't have a defender nearby when the offensive player actually takes them. But even though the Bucks are really good at getting themselves good shots, they are only league average when it comes to team effective field goal and shooting percentage. So to put it in other words, the Bucks are generating shots at the level of an elite offense like the Boston Celtics or the Sacramento Kings, but their shot makers are performing as if they're an average or even below average team. Like, think of teams with the level of shooting ability of the Minnesota Timberwolves or Chicago Bulls. That's really the output that you're getting with the Bucks this season. And then one other glaring weakness in the Bucks offense that really does need to be addressed, and I'm sorry about this, but Giannis takes a lot of jump shots and he's not making them. So when I was digging into it, it turns out that Giannis is taking over 6 open jump shots per game, but he's making those at a rate of about 30%, which is obviously horrible. So obviously the Bucks can't control when Khris Middleton is able to be healthy enough to come back, but one thing that they can control is taking some of these bad shots that Giannis is taking and at least generating a 3-point look for someone else. Just about any shot that you can generate off of a pass or off of a driving kick or something like that is going to be better than Giannis taking a jump shot. And I hate to say that because I really do love Giannis, but I do wish that he would cut down on these bad shots that he's taking because his efficiency this year is also hurting and he can make it a lot better just by taking less bad shots. Okay, number 3, this was definitely a surprise to me and Ian. It may not have been a surprise to some of you guys, but this is Rudy Gobert's fit, or maybe lack thereof so far, with the Minnesota Timberwolves this season. So it's kind of been an up and down year with Rudy Gobert. The Wolves are really bad on offense when he's on the court, but really good on defense. And the opposite is pretty much true when he hits the bench. The Wolves become a very good offensive team, but a very bad defensive one. So maybe it's fair to say the Rudy Gobert trade has had mixed results so far, and whether the Timberwolves can drag this trade out of being one of the worst trades of all time, as many people are already preemptively calling it, is really up to whether they can figure out an offensive system that works around Rudy Gobert. The good news is we know it's not impossible to have an effective NBA offense while Rudy Gobert is on the court. The Utah Jazz were famously, up at the top of the league in offensive rating for several seasons in a row, even with Rudy Gobert on the court, and a lot of that was just due to spacing the floor very well around him, and when they do involve Rudy Gobert in the offense, it's very simplistic dump-off passes or lobs that he can easily finish. The Timberwolves so far have not been very good at getting Rudy Gobert involved in the offense. And some of that is Rudy Gobert's limitations, but some of that is just not knowing how to play around him when he's on the court either. And one example I wanted to bring up is the most glaring offensive issue is what I like to call the threes and the frees. And these are usually the two factors I look at when a team is struggling offensively to figure out why. Often it's rooted in three-pointers and free throws. These are kind of the foundations of offense for many teams in this day and age. So with Rudy on the court, the Minnesota Timberwolves are a very bad three-point shooting team. Collectively as a team, they only shoot 32% with him on the court. And as a whole, this hurts their overall efficiency. Their true shooting goes down. And one thing that's not listed here, but is also true, is the team has a higher free throw rate with Rudy Gobert on the bench than when he is on the court. But when he's off the court, the team shoots very well from 3. But one thing we can point to is the Utah Jazz did not seem to have much trouble generating high-quality three-point looks with Rudy Gobert on the floor, so why are the Minnesota Timberwolves struggling so much to do this? Personally, I think in large part it's just due to a lack of overall playmaking on the Minnesota Timberwolves roster. The Wolves as a whole have kind of been hilariously bad at getting Rudy Gobert involved in just simple pick and rolls. Over the course of the season, they have been trying to involve him more in the offense, but they're still really lacking when it comes to just running a bunch of high pick and roll with Rudy Gobert, which, if you're going to have him and be a successful offensive team, is kind of the way that you need to be able to do it. Rudy Gobert is really good as a lob threat and as a catch and dunk or catch and finish right away guy, but if you ask him to take dribbles, if you ask him to just stand around the basket and clog up the paint, he's going to hurt your team. You need to put him in motion, but in a way in which it's simplistic enough where he can just be a pure play finisher and not have to worry about anything else. And the Wolves have been really bad at implementing that. And I personally am optimistic that the Wolves coming down the road over the next few seasons will maybe never be an elite offensive team with Rudy Gobert on the floor, but they can at least be better than they are right now. And the fact that they're still very good defensively when he's on the floor is a promising sign because it means he can provide value if they can just figure out the offensive issues. Okay, our next surprise this season, this one is a pleasant one for once, and it is the Sacramento Kings. The Sacramento Kings have been great this season. They've been one of the best offenses in the NBA all year round, and currently they're in 3rd place in the Western Conference. And I know with how much the West standings have shuffled up this year, that may not last for very long. So the way I kind of wanted to illustrate their record is basically by saying they're on pace for a 48-win season, which by their standards is really good. The Kings have been the 3rd best offense in the NBA this year per offensive rating, and they have had a lot of struggles defensively. They are one of the bottom 10 defenses and have been pretty much the whole season. So it is a little bit of a boom or bust team in their case. But for a team that hasn't made the playoffs in, I believe, 16 seasons, just the fact that they're really good and near the top of the NBA in anything, I would say, is a huge win. And we can worry about their weaknesses later on down the road. My favorite thing about the Kings is they're good in ways that are really fun offensively. They're not just a team that bombs a ton of threes and plays 5-out spacing and gets free runs to the basket because teams struggle to defend 5 3-point shooters, as a lot of the best offenses in the NBA are these days. They're a team that really utilizes highly effective playmaking to generate good shots. The Sacramento Kings are top 3 at finishing in the paint and around the rim, and they're one of the best rebounding teams in the NBA as well. And I'm going to attribute these factors mainly to Domantas Sabonis and how brilliant he's been this year. But it's not just that, they also have a very well-rounded offense, in that they're a top 10 team in both generating free throws and three-pointers. Thanks in large part to De'Aaron Fox and how well he's played this season. With Fox and Sabonis and their two-man game really being the bread and butter of this offense, and both of them being such great playmakers that they can find open shooters and cutters all around them and get them the ball in positions to score. It does finally look like we're going to have the Sacramento Kings playoff experience that we've been lacking for so long, and they may even have home court advantage this year, which would have just been unthinkable if you told someone that during the past couple of seasons. And also, of course, shout out to Mike Brown. He's done a great job with this team, and I think that was an excellent hire by the Sacramento Kings. Okay, for our last surprise here, it's time to turn negative once again, and this is the Warriors' struggles that they've had this year. Right now they're a 500 team, and they've been hovering around 500 just about the entire season, so right in that Western Conference play-in mix. They have shown gradual improvement throughout the season, getting a little bit better both offensively and defensively, but their defense still continues to be a struggle, and it's very uncharacteristic of the Warriors, who have really been a defensive stalwart for the better part of the last decade. Aside from that one aberration season in 2020 where Curry got hurt and Draymond got hurt and Clay was hurt and the whole team was just kind of a mess and they tanked and ended up with James Wiseman, if you discount that season, every season over the past 10 years, the Warriors have been at least top 11 in defensive rating. So this year, unless things continue to improve and get better, this is going to be their worst performance as a team with Draymond healthy and active on the floor for the better part of the season. If you dive into the Warriors' defensive performance this year, there are signs to point to that are positives. They are really good at preventing opponents from getting to the rim. They aren't necessarily an elite rim protection once people actually get there, but they do allow a league-best opponents shooting only 29% of the shots at the rim. That's a big plus. But the downsides are they are terrible at giving up free throws to their opponents because they just foul a lot, and they also give up a lot of open threes. I think the biggest redeeming factor is, of course, Draymond's play. Draymond has had one of the most impactful defensive seasons of his career, and that's not necessarily because he's playing at peak Draymond levels, but mostly because the rest of the team is so bad and they're so incredibly reliant, more so than ever before, on him to keep their defense afloat. So with Draymond on the court, the Warriors actually have a league-best 109 defensive rating. That would be the number one team in the NBA right now if they were able to play with Draymond on the court for all 48 minutes. But unfortunately, they're not, and when Draymond is off the court, they're at about 115 defensive rating, which is 26 in the NBA. That's not very good. And I think a large part of this is just the Warriors role players are really struggling to provide effective defense, something that hasn't been a big Warriors issue in the past. This has always been a team with multiple effective defenders, and now they've really been narrowed down to only just a couple, Draymond and Kevon Looney being the two main ones. I mentioned earlier they foul a ton, they're near bottom of the league in opponent free throw rate, and they also turn the ball over a lot. On top of giving the opponent a lot of open three-point shots and free throws, they're also giving them a lot of fast break opportunities with all the turnovers. I guess the bright side is when the playoffs come around, providing the Warriors are able to either get into the top 6 seeds in the West or make it through the play-in, they'll be able to cut down on their rotation even more, meaning Draymond is going to spend more time on the court, and that should improve their overall defense. However, I will say the evidence is kind of strongly suggesting it's going to be difficult for the Warriors to be an elite defensive team this year. And as we all know, it's really hard to win a title unless you have an elite defense. Sorry to end on a negative note there. I do really like the Warriors a lot, and I hope they can kind of turn things around and at least make things interesting in the playoffs, add another contender to the mix in the Western Conference, but they're definitely going to have to make improvements to make that happen. But those were the 5 surprising things that I had for me for this season. There are definitely more things as well that have happened this year that have been a surprise. If you have something else that you thought was surprising about watching basketball this year and something you didn't see coming this season, let us know in the comments. And maybe while you're doing that, we went over our top 5 rookies this season in our video last week, and you can check that out here if you're interested in who we considered to be the 5 best performing rookies this year. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Underhand Free Throw.